Okay guys, today we're doing the ultimate review of my Toyota MR2 Mark 1. And it's the ultimate review because I'm not gonna be reviewing this car as somebody who did a little bit of research on it and then took a 15-minute drive in it and then did a review. I'm gonna be doing a review as someone who has owned this car for more than 5 years. During that time, I rebuilt this car's transmission. I rebuilt its engine twice. I rebuilt its entire suspension. I rebuilt its brakes. And I did a million other things to it. So I know it inside and out. And then I drove it. I drove it a lot. I drove it in the city. I drove it on the highway. And most importantly, I drove it on twisty mountain roads. This entire summer, I enjoyed it. So honestly, I pretty much know everything there is to know about this car. So let's do an awesome ultimate review of the Toyota MR2 Mark 1. So there's a lot of sheep poop here for some reason. Look, sheep poop. And I got some of it on my tire. And I think I got some of it on my car, so I'm gonna kill myself. So let's start with first impressions. And that's the exterior, of course. The exterior is the first thing you'll see of any car. And if you like the MR2, that's probably the thing you have fallen in love with. And it's a very unique design. In my opinion, it's probably one of the most 80s cars ever. I mean, this is what they imagined the future would look like in the 80s, but they couldn't wait for it, you know, so they made it right away. And that's what makes this car so awesome. Sadly though, they were wrong about the future, and the future didn't turn out looking like this. It turned out looking like this. I mean, it kind of looks like the result of unprotected sex between a jet fighter and a car. And of course, it has pop-up headlights, which are the quintessential feature of any wedge-shaped car. But one of the things I like most about it is its compact size. I mean, I'm 6'2". I look positively giant next to this car. And when you park it on the street, next to the vast majority of cars, it looks a million times smaller, a million times more compact, and it simply screams that it's lighter and more rewarding to drive than your average bubble car of today. So if you're into the 80s, if you're into retro stuff, and if you like, you know, wedge-shaped cars, you're gonna absolutely love the MR2 Mark 1. You're never gonna get sick of looking at it. But if you're more into, you know, some sort of flowing lines, if you're a guy that likes more oval, more rounded shapes, then the Mark II MR2 might actually be more, you know, to your liking. I stepped in the sheep poop, didn't I? Crap. If we step into the interior of the MR2, you're gonna notice that it's actually a lot more roomy and a lot more spacious than its exterior compact size would suggest. As I said, I'm 6'2", and my driving position actually is really nice, and I never feel even a tiny bit cramped in this car. And my driving position actually leaves some room for the seat to be pushed even a bit more towards the back. I mean, I've sat in the MX-5 NA, the first generation of the Mazda Miata, and my final driving position actually ends up being at the very end of the Miata's seat adjustment range. Just like the exterior, the interior is full of those jet fighter-esque design elements. I mean, back in the 80s, they were sure everybody's gonna have flying cars by 2002, so they incorporated as much of that into the interior so people would be basically ready for their own personal, you know, jet fighter by the time they hit the market. I mean, just look at this part right here. Let me show you. I mean, just look at this part right behind the steering, this dash around here, and these protruding design elements. Your steering column basically has nothing on it other than your indicator controls in both the wiper controls and the headlight controls have been moved to these elements here for minimum fuss and maximum jet fighter. As you can see, the MR2 is a proper sports car, and your butt doesn't just feel like it's inches from the ground, it actually is just inches from the ground. And of course that feels really nice when you're driving the car hard through some corners. And the seats, they're so 80s. I mean, just look at these little harmonicas here. They're so 80s that they play 80s music when you sit in them. Their music capabilities aside, the seats are actually really nice and really comfortable and come with a lot of adjustments in their stock form. That's a helicopter flying, I don't know if you can see it. And it's killing my audio probably. So yeah, the seats are awesome. And while they may not be really adequate for, let's say, some racing or autocross or whatever, the side supports are good, but they can't compare with a proper racing seat. Other than that, they're perfectly fine for the street, really nice, actually really pretty, they suit the car, and they are really comfortable. And everywhere else you look in the interior, the wedges and the 80s continue. Your normie girlfriend is probably gonna think this is all outdated and stupid, but you can enjoy the interior knowing that it's gonna make you feel more special than almost any interior out there that you can buy for the kind of money an MR2 costs. And also, when you're driving it, you get to look at pop-up headlights all day long. And that's actually a proven cure against sadness and depression. So now a few useful tips what to look out for if you decide to buy an MR2, what to look out for in the interior, because these are 30-year-old interiors and some of their most common faults have started to show. The door handles are likely going to look like this. They're going to be faded. The door upholstery is likely going to do this. This part right here on the center console here is often broken. I glued some, custom plastic pieces on the underneath to keep this stable, but it's often broken because idiot previous owners during the car's dirt cheap phase probably sat in it something like this. Hey brah, yo brah, what's up brah, what's up? The brackets for the shifter boot are right here, and in almost 2/3 of the cars they're broken. This center console surround is broken or otherwise damaged in the vast majority of cars, and this is one of those used parts that is often really expensive. The ashtray cover is also going to be probably broken or missing in the vast majority of cars. But other than that, the interior is over-engineered. It's almost foolproof. All of the switches almost always work. I know as somebody was a gorilla with them. The heating, all this stuff often works. This stuff can break on really old, really high mileage cars, so it's a good idea to lube some of these cables and sliding mechanisms that are right behind, but otherwise almost everything's going to work properly. None of this fails as often as it does in some of the modern cars. Also, the dashboard of the MR2, I have a cover here for prevention reasons to protect it, but this dashboard really rarely breaks, unlike in some other older cars, especially some famous German cars. So now let's start her up and see the most important thing, and that's what the MR2 is like to drive. Okay, let's get out of here. So what's the MR2 like to drive? Well, you probably already know this, but the MR2 is mid-engined. And what that means, it means that the engine isn't in front of you like in the vast majority of cars. It's actually behind you. And I'm not gonna go into depth in this video why that is good. I'm just gonna say that it's enough of an argument that some of the greatest cars ever made, that many of the greatest cars ever made, were actually mid-engined. So having the engine behind you is really great for driving dynamics. And the MR2, to put it simply, it's an extremely rewarding car to drive. It's very, very enjoyable to drive. And for lack of better words, it's actually like a road legal go-kart. And it's not a terribly expensive car to buy, but it can offer you some of the thrills, many of the thrills of some incredibly expensive vintage sports cars. Being old, it's a pure analog driving experience. The MR2 steering, the MR2 Mark I never came with power steering. So the steering wheel, if you have never driven an older car without power steering, it's probably going to be a bit shocking, and you're going to think that it's incredibly heavy, and you're going to think that parallel parking is a nightmare. But when you take it to a twisty mountain road for the first time, and when you experience this steering wheel talking back to you, you're going to understand why a no power steering is the purest of pure driving sensations. It's extremely enjoyable. Now, if you test drive an MR2 Mark I and the steering feels kind of vague and unsafe, I'm gonna bet that the rubber insulation thing in your steering column right here, close to your legs, is worn, and that's what's creating the vague and horrible steering feel. When properly, either replaced, repaired, or when the steering wheel, when your steering wheel isn't worn out at all, the MR2 steering wheel doesn't have any play, and it feels really nice, really, really direct. Action is also really nice, but if it feels weird, if it's crunchy, if it's hard, if it's horrible, the transmissions are mostly old, and many MR2s have been driven really hard, so it likely needs some work or a different transmission or whatever. When it's in good condition or when it's been serviced, the transmission feels really nice, the shifting is nice and organic. The throw is a bit long, and an MR2 Mark I can benefit from a short throw shifter kit, but of course don't do that if the transmission isn't in top-notch condition. Otherwise the short shift kit is just gonna emphasize everything that's wrong with the transmission. Mine's stock. I never went for a short throw shifter kit because I find it enjoyable. I mostly drive on the street, and I might make one in the future, but right now I'm honestly satisfied with it the way it is. Again, this being an analog car, the feeling of the brakes, of the throttle is of course a cable, it's not an electronic throttle, the clutch, everything is very nice, very organic, and it lets you feel the car. It lets you, I'm gonna use another cliche, it lets you be one with the car. It really lets you feel the road, and it gives you confidence to drive this car fast. It's never lying to you. You know what's going on, and you know when you're gonna lose traction and what's gonna happen next. Another thing that's really often associated with mid-engine cars is snap oversteer. I'm not gonna go into detail in this video what snap oversteer is and how it happens and so on. I have a specific video on that on snap oversteer alone. If you're interested, check it out, click on the suggested video or go to the description. I'm just gonna say that snap oversteer, yes, it exists in all mid-engine cars and it is more pronounced than in non-mid-engine cars. But in the MR2, for example, one of the main culprits of snap oversteer is a poor condition of the suspension or driver error. That's what I'm gonna say in this video, and you can see the rest in that snap oversteer video. So the MR2 is well balanced, it's nice to drive, and it's predictable when the suspension is in good condition. Now the MR2's suspension is a simple McPherson setup, and it was fun, reliable, and enjoyable to drive from the factory. But as I said multiple times in this video, the MR2 is a 30-year-old car now. And if the suspension hasn't received servicing and tender loving care in the past, I don't know, 5-10 years, then likely the MR2 isn't gonna be fun, it's gonna feel weird to drive, it's gonna feel unsafe, and it isn't gonna be fun. So if you buy a cheaper MR2 that, you know, didn't receive, you know, investments and care in the past, to make the most of it, to actually enjoy the car, you are definitely gonna need to, at the very least, invest in the suspension and freshen it up. Or if you want to make really the most of the car, if you want to make it really good and enjoyable to drive, you're gonna want to upgrade the suspension a bit, you know, to bring it into the 21st century and to make the car even more responsive, even more sporty, even more enjoyable to drive. So I drive my MR2 mostly on the street, and the setup that I decided to go with was some Coney yellow shock inserts, some Aibach Pro Kit springs, and a total Prothane total kit of polyurethane bushings. And while the suspension did get a little bit harder, it's still sufficiently comfortable over bumps, but it makes the car an absolute joy to drive. I honestly couldn't be happier with this setup. The car is even more, you know, responsive now. It's just better, and it's a blast. And many people also decide to go with coilovers for the MR2. Now there's a whole, you know, tuning theory, suspension tuning theory, a bible about how it should be tuned, because there's a lot of adjustments to be made on the MR2 suspension, and getting something even a bit wrong can turn the car into a very punishing, a very, you know, weird feeling car that is very snappy and it's hard to control. And so you want to be careful when tuning the MR2 suspension. There is a lot of documentation on that out there, so some research is definitely going to be useful. Coilovers can be a good idea, but they can make the car really hard, and it can make it, you know, the snappy characteristic can be more pronounced in case the front coilovers do not have enough travel in them. So be careful with that. Some brands make some nice products, others don't. So be careful what you put on the suspension. Modding the suspension is a good idea, but you have to be smart about it. Now when it comes to the brakes, as I said, the brake feel is really nice, it's really organic, but compared to modern brakes, this is probably the MR2's biggest weakness. And if you drive the car hard downhill, you're gonna notice that the brakes are going to start to fade much sooner than in some modern sporty cars. I completely rebuilt my brakes with new everything. I rebuilt the calipers, there's new pads, new discs, new everything, but still they do tend to fade pretty fast when you're driving the car really hard. So if you wanna compete in the MR2, if you wanna race, if you wanna do some autocross, if you wanna drive it hard, the very minimum is to at least get some, you know, racing brake pads. And if you want to be more serious, then a brake caliper, you know, an entire braking system upgrade is actually a pretty good idea. So now, the all-important question: is the MR2 Mark I a fast car? Well, the answer is yes and no. The MR2, most of the MR2s out there you're gonna find are with the 4AGE engine. This is a 1.6 liter 16 valve engine. It's a legendary, really charming engine from Toyota, and in stock form it came with either 116 horsepower when it had a catalytic converter, or it came with 124 horsepower without a catalytic converter. As you can probably tell by today's standards, that sort of power is kind of ridiculous when cars are now when 200 horsepower, is available in some modest family cars. So it isn't a lot of power, and on the straight line, the MR2 will be embarrassed by modern hot hatches. However, it is still not slow, and it can manage in stock form a 0 to 60 time of around 8 seconds, and that's not bad. But still, modern cars, turbo cars, it's all going to be faster than the MR2. When it comes to driving it on a twisty road where engine power isn't the dominant, factor, then the MR2 is a fast car. And when the suspension is done right, the MR2 is extremely hard to embarrass in a twisty mountain road, and it can keep up with cars that have a lot more horsepower than itself. Now, if you're hungry for more power, you can look for the supercharged MR2. In the supercharged MR2, which was available later during the MR2 Mark I's production run, the 1.6 liter 4AGE engine gets a supercharger and turns into a 1.6 liter 4AGZE engine, and it has 145 horsepower. Now that again doesn't sound like much, but the supercharged MR2 is a genuinely quick car, and it can do 0 to 60 in less than 7 seconds, and it can actually embarrass some more modern cars because even though it doesn't have 200 or 300 horsepower, it is very small and very light. So we're back in the garage, and this is the place where I spent countless hours working on and restoring my MR2. So I think this is an appropriate place for me to tell you whether the MR2 is reliable and what's it like to work on. Well, many people out of the box will just think, it's a Toyota, so of course it's reliable. The 4AG engine has a reputation for being pretty much bulletproof. So yeah, of course it's going to be reliable. I'm going to pick up one for cheap and it's going to be reliable and I'm going to enjoy it, as it is. In the real world, it's not like that anymore. Let's not forget this is now a 30-plus-year-old car. Mine's 32-year-old, some are 33, 34-year-old cars. And all MR2s, well, all non-expensive, the cars that aren't expensive to buy today, MR2 Mark I's, have gone through a phase back maybe a decade ago or so when 80s and 90s Japanese sports cars were dirt cheap. During those times back in the early 2000s, I think, they would often end up in the hands of people with, let's say, questionable motives and questionable intelligence. The kind of people that prefer to spend money on giant, ugly wheels and ridiculous, huge speakers, instead of spending money on brake pads and oil filters and timing belts. You get what I mean. During those were very dangerous times for many 80s and 90s Japanese iconic cars, and during those times many of those cars got hurt. If you get a cheap MR2, to make the most out of it, you're gonna have to give it tender love and care, i.e. you're gonna have to give it money. And you're gonna have to be willing to work on your car. Because if you buy a cheap MR2, you cannot just take it to any mechanic, in the neighborhood and tell him to fix it. A typical modern mechanic that's used to reading, fault code scanners is likely gonna make it worse. This is a car that's honestly a much better car as a project car, as a DIY project, as a car that you're gonna devote your time to, a chunk of your free time when you can, and improve it bit by bit. Buy new parts, replace things, and make the car, basically your dream driving machine. It can be done, but you have to be willing to work on your car, you have to be willing to learn. If you don't have these skills, you're gonna need some tools and you're likely gonna need a garage. The MR2 can be daily driven. I mean, it's not impossible. Don't let me tell you what to do. But driving it daily is honestly, it's gonna require the right mindset, a lot of motivation, and it's not gonna be cheap. And also from time to time, it might be kind of troublesome. It's actually easier, at least I found this, it's easier to have a more practical, more reliable and easier to maintain daily driver, and then enjoy the MR2 when you have free time or on the weekends. The question of whether the MR2 is practical, and that one's super easy to answer. No, it's not a practical car. It's a two-seater, it's mid-engined, it has a little bit of surprisingly generous trunk space in the back, but it's nothing special. It has a little bit of trunk space in the front. It has 2 seats. So yeah, it's made, to be enjoyed, to be fun to drive. It's not made, to take the family on a shopping spree to IKEA. So if you do decide to get an MR2, and if you get one that isn't a super clean show car and you're willing to work on it, what should you expect? What's it like to work on? Well, people are often going to suggest that because the engine's in the back and the engine bay is cramped, it's really hard to work on and access is really difficult. In my experience, and recently I worked on a lot of cars, it's not difficult to work on at all. I rebuilt this entire car myself without a professional car lift. I raised the car off the ground using nothing but wood that you can buy in a hardware store, and I rebuilt the whole car. And of course it wasn't super easy, and it took time, but I could do it all by myself. And compared to modern cars that have a million cables and plastic and sensors and whatnot in the engine bay, working on the MR2 is a breeze. Almost everything is easily accessible. You just have to lift up, the engine lid, and you can get to almost anything fairly easily. You do not have to remove 3 million things before you get to the one thing you want to replace. Everything is fairly easily accessible and it's enjoyable to work on. And actually it's a great first project car because you can learn almost all car maintenance basics on an MR2 and have fun doing it before or if you decide to step up to some more modern, more complicated, more powerful platform. So to finish off this video, I'm going to give you 2 useful pieces of documentation basically. Number 1 is you can pause the video when I display this right now, and you can also find this little list in the video description. You can print it out if and when you decide to go take a look at an MR2 you're considering to buy. And this is a little simple basic checklist of the most common things to look at when you're buying an MR2 to basically carry out an inspection of whether you should buy the car or not, and to know whether the price is fair. Other than these basic things, of course, do all the other checks of when you're buying a used vehicle. And what that means is, just give up, buy with your heart, spend the money, because in any case you're gonna find a bunch of more things that you're gonna need to look at and work on and service down the road anyway. So find a nice one, find one that attracts you, and heck, just buy it. I went and picked up mine without even taking any sort of inspection on it. I even drove it back. It was a car that hasn't been started for a couple of years. I drove it back, I liked it, I bought it. It needed a lot of work, but honestly it was the journey of a lifetime. I learned a lot and it was really, really fun. And the second useful piece of documentation is a self-assessment quiz that's gonna tell you whether you should buy an MR2 Mark 1. This is of course a completely subjectively designed thing, and it's absolutely useless, but I don't want to tell you what to do, and that's why I devised this little self-assessment quiz. It's gonna come up on the screen right now. You can pause and take a look at it, and as you can see, you're gonna answer the question, and all the yes answers carry a number of points, and then you're gonna add up the number of points when you do all the answers. If you scored 7 or more points on the little quiz, then you should buy a Toyota MR2 Mark 1. If you scored like 5 or 6 points, then maybe think about it a little bit more, sleep on it. And tomorrow, if you still feel like you really want this car and you just gotta have it, then heck, go out and buy it. If you got like 2 or 3 points, I don't know why you're even watching this video and why you watched up to this point, so leave. Yeah. So yeah, that's it basically when it comes to the ultimate review of the Toyota MR2 Mark 1. I personally really like this car. I think it's a massively underrated car, and I think it can make anybody who's into cars and driving really happy. It makes me really happy every time I drive it. If you have any other questions regarding the Toyota MR2 Mark 1, feel free to ask in the comment section and I'll answer to the best of my abilities. Also, if you're interested in more MR2 Mark 1 content and automotive DIY stuff, I basically built unintentionally an entire channel around the Toyota MR2 Mark 1, so definitely check out my other videos. There's some in the suggested videos right here, also in the description. Check them out, some of them are kind of good, so you can watch them. Yeah, not all of them, of course. So yeah, if you like this video, of course, also consider liking, sharing, subscribing. I appreciate all of that as well. So yeah, I'm gonna shut up now. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll be seeing you next time with more fun and awesome stuff on the D4A channel.